The hall was alive with noise that afternoon, the kind of noise that rises when people come together without any serious purpose. Families were settling into their seats, friends were greeting each other, and children were running here and there while the host tried to keep the program moving. No one seemed to notice the young girl sitting close to the piano on the side of the stage. She sat with her hands in her lap, her posture straight but unsure, like she was trying not to take too much space. She kept her eyes on the floor most of the time, as if she didn't want anyone to look too closely at her. People who passed by her barely paid attention. Some thought she was a volunteer, helping with the event. Others assumed she was here to play something small, maybe a basic tune that would come and go without leaving any mark. The piano she was supposed to play wasn't in great shape. It was old, with a few scratches on the sides and keys that had lost some of their shine. The hall itself was nothing grand, just a place the community rented for small events. No one expected anything special to come from that stage. It was just another local gathering. The host was busy checking the order of performances. There had been dance routines, a poetry reading, and a short comedy act. When it was time to call the next performer, the host looked around and saw the quiet girl sitting by the piano. For a moment, the host wondered if she was ready. The girl looked nervous, almost too still, like she might change her mind if given enough time, but she stood up when her name was called. She didn't rush, but she didn't hesitate either. She walked to the piano with small steps, calm but clearly nervous. A few people in the front rows glanced at her and whispered among themselves. Most of them didn't expect much. Some even thought she was too young to play anything meaningful. Others thought she might play something safe, maybe a simple children's tune. No one imagined she had spent years teaching herself without proper lessons, practicing in empty rooms whenever she found a moment alone as she reached the piano bench. She took another breath, slow and careful, like she was grounding herself. Her hands were slightly cold. She placed them gently on her knees at first, then slowly lifted them toward the keys. Before playing, she glanced at the audience. Many were still distracted, talking softly or scrolling through their phones. A child whispered loudly in the back, and someone shushed him half-heartedly. The room wasn't ready for anything special. It wasn't prepared for a moment that might stay with people long after the event was over. The girl remembered the first time she ever touched a piano. It wasn't this one. It wasn't even in a hall. It had been an old keyboard at school, something left behind by a student who had moved away. She had been fascinated by the idea that pressing a key could create a sound so smooth, so full, so calming. She had no teacher then. She had no one guiding her hands or telling her what to do. She learned by listening and trying again and again, until her fingers began to understand patterns on their own. Her life had never been filled with chances to perform. Music was something she kept to herself, something she used to ease the stress of growing up without stability or comfort. She practiced whenever she found a quiet corner, often playing softly so no one would hear. She didn't want attention. She wanted understanding. And music became that understanding for her. When her friend encouraged her to join this event, she said no at first. She didn't think she was good enough. She didn't think her music mattered to anyone else. But her friend insisted, saying maybe it was time to stop hiding. And somehow, that idea stayed in her mind long enough for her to finally say yes. Now here she was, sitting on a stage she had never imagined standing on, surrounded by people who had no expectations of her. It was strange. It was almost unfair how easily people assumed things about her. But she didn't blame them. She had spent so long trying to go unnoticed that she had almost succeeded too well. She gently placed her fingers on the keys and let them rest there for a moment. The room was still not fully quiet. Someone coughed. Someone else adjusted their chair. A phone buzzed somewhere. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to block the noise, but to steady her heartbeat. She knew she could play something simple and leave without drawing any attention. But a small part of her whispered that maybe today wasn't the day to play small. She opened her eyes again. Her fingers adjusted on the keys, finding the starting point of the melody she had practiced many nights in silence. It wasn't a famous piece. It wasn't something from a book. It was something she made slowly over time, adding bits to it whenever she needed to express something she couldn't put into words. When she pressed the first note, it rang out softer than she expected. Not weak, but gentle, like a voice carefully entering a conversation. A few people in the crowd looked up briefly, then went back to what they were doing. But the girl didn't let that affect her. She pressed the second note slightly stronger, then the third. Her fingers moved steadily. It's like they were remembering a path they had walked many times. Her heart was still beating fast, but the melody helped her settle into the moment. As she continued to play, the room slowly began to quiet down. A few people noticed the tone of her playing was different from what they had expected. One person stopped scrolling on their phone. Another leaned back in their seat, trying to hear better. Even the host paused to listen. The girl didn't notice these changes at first. She was inside the music, letting it guide her. Her fingers brushed the keys in a smooth rhythm, not rushing, not hesitating. She played like she was sharing a piece of her life, one note at a time. The soft noise in the hall faded gradually. People began to sense that something was happening on stage. They couldn't explain it immediately, but the sound was warm, full, and more emotional than they had expected. It didn't sound like a beginner testing the piano. It didn't sound like someone who learned from videos in secret. It sounded like someone who had lived with the music long enough for it to become part of her. A child in the front row tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed toward the stage. The mother, who had been chatting quietly, looked up and watched with surprise. An older man who had been dozing off straightened his posture. Two teenagers who had been whispering to each other stopped mid-sentence. The girl kept playing, unaware of how many eyes were slowly turning toward her. The melody deepened as she reached a part she had written during a difficult time in her life. Her fingers moved with more confidence, shaping each note with care. The hall was now almost silent, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they might be witnessing something rare. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Another replied softly, "I don't know, but this sounds different." The girl did not hear them, but if she had, she would have been surprised. She had always believed no one would care about her music. She never thought her playing would stop conversations or draw attention from a room full of people who didn't know her. As her performance continued, it felt as though the air in the hall grew softer. People who had come for an ordinary afternoon were now watching with curiosity. Many of them had expected her to play a small tune and leave without anyone remembering her name. But what they were hearing now didn't match the image they had formed in their minds. The girl finally reached the end of the piece. The last note held for a moment, drifting across the room. When it faded, the hall remained silent. She sat frozen, unsure of what would happen next. Her heart was pounding again, louder than ever. And then, slowly, the silence broke. People began to clap, not loudly at first, but warmly, with a sense of surprise. They clapped because they had been caught off guard. They clapped because they realized they had underestimated her. They clapped because something simple had just turned into something meaningful. The girl looked up, her eyes wide, unsure if she should smile or leave the stage. She had not expected applause. She had not expected attention. She had expected nothing more than a small moment she could go home and forget. But the world in front of her seemed different now. The people who had thought she was ordinary were looking at her with new eyes. Some looked thoughtful, some impressed, some almost moved. She could feel their change, even if she didn't fully understand it. She stood from the bench quietly and gave a small nod to the audience. The host, still surprised, stepped back on stage and told the crowd they had witnessed something special. The girl almost didn't believe it. She stepped off the stage the same way she'd walked onto it, carefully, quietly, but this time something inside her felt lighter as she returned to her seat. She wondered if this moment would matter in the future. She didn't know yet. She just knew that for the first time she had let people hear the music she usually kept hidden, and somehow, that small act had changed the room. Part of her still felt the shy uncertainty that had guided her most of her life. But another part felt something new, something brave. She had stepped into the light, even for a moment. And her first note had proven something not just to the audience, but to herself. She walked home that evening with the sound of clapping still echoing in her mind. It stayed with her in a way she did not expect. She had never imagined a room full of strangers would fall silent for her, even for a minute. She never imagined that something she created quietly over the years would reach anyone's heart. For a long time, she had played music only for herself. It was the one place where she didn't have to pretend to be confident. She didn't have to speak, explain herself, or worry about making mistakes. Music understood her in a way people rarely did. At home, everything was simple. The walls were thin, the lights sometimes flickered, and the living room had mismatched chairs collected over time. Her family worked long hours, so no one was home when she returned. She placed her bag on the small table near the door and stood silently for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her. She didn't mind silence. She was used to it. Maybe too used to it, she walked to her room and sat on the edge of her bed. The small keyboard she practiced on was tucked against the wall. It wasn't anything fancy. Some keys stuck, and others made a faint buzzing sound before they played. But that keyboard had been with her for years. It had seen her through growing pains, lonely afternoons, long nights when she felt like she had no one to talk to. She looked at it now with a strange mix of comfort and sadness. Comfort, because it had always been with her when nothing else was. Sadness, because she wished she had more. More guidance. More support. More chances to grow. She lightly touched the keys, but she didn't play. Her mind kept returning to the moment she stepped off the stage. She remembered how the crowd looked at her curious, surprised, maybe even impressed. No one had ever looked at her like that. Before, she wondered if she deserved it. She wondered if she had only been lucky, she wondered. If she could ever do something that meaningful again. The thought made her nervous, almost anxious. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to people expecting anything from her as she sat there. Her thoughts drifted back to the time when she first fell in love with music. She had been small, walking home from school one day, when she heard someone playing the piano through an open window. The sound floated into the street like it belonged to another world, soft, warm, full of stories she couldn't see, but somehow felt. She had stopped walking. She stood there, listening silently, afraid that even breathing too loudly would break the moment. The melody had been simple, but it touched something inside her. She didn't know how long she stood there. She only remembered wanting to hear more. But when she walked away, she didn't imagine she would ever learn to play. Music, she thought back then, was for people with lessons, polished instruments, and families who understood those things. She didn't think she would ever belong in that world. It wasn't until that old keyboard at school appeared, abandoned, dusty, and slightly broken, that she felt a small window open. She started pressing keys one at a time, making sounds that didn't make sense at first. But the more she played, the more she understood. She played during lunch breaks, after school, and sometimes even when she was supposed to be somewhere else. She remembered a day when one of the teachers caught her practicing. Instead of telling her to leave, the teacher watched quietly for a moment. When she finished, the teacher simply said, "You play with feeling." Not many people do that, then walked away. It was the first compliment she ever received about her playing. Over the years, she kept practicing. She had no teacher. No one corrected her mistakes or showed her a better way to hold her hands. She learned through listening, watching others, and repeating things until they felt right. She didn't even know if the way she played was technically correct. All she knew was that it felt honest. Her thoughts returned to the present. She leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. The applause from that afternoon felt unreal. It felt like it happened to someone else. She touched her face lightly, unsure why she felt so emotional. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was the sudden realization that she had something people cared about. She got up and stepped into the small kitchen. There wasn't much food in the fridge, but she wasn't hungry anyway. She poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking at the street below. The sun was setting, turning the sky soft orange. People were heading home, some talking, some carrying bags, some walking with their children. She wondered how many of them had something hidden inside them, an ability, a dream that no one else knew about. Maybe everyone had something. Maybe people were just too busy to notice each other's quiet strengths. Her phone buzzed with a message. She picked it up slowly. It was from her friend, the one who convinced her to. Perform in the first place, the message read. You were amazing today. Everyone was talking about you after you left the stage. I told you they'd love it. Be proud. You earned this. She read the message twice. She wasn't used to praise. She didn't know how to react to it. She turned the phone off and placed it face down on the table. She didn't respond right away. She needed time to understand what she was feeling. Later that night, her family returned home tired from work. They noticed she seemed quieter than usual, but they didn't ask why. They were used to her quiet nature. She helped set the table for dinner, listened to their stories about the day, and smiled politely. She wanted to tell them about the performance, but she didn't know how. They knew she played the keyboard sometimes, but they didn't understand how deeply music had become a part of her life. After dinner, she went back to her room, closed the door gently, and sat again at her keyboard. This time she let her fingers touch the keys with intention. She played the same melody she had played at the community hall. It sounded different now, heavier. Fuller because she understood that it no longer belonged only to her. She played softly so her family wouldn't hear, but enough for herself to feel the music again. And as she played, she remembered the way the audience had grown silent. She remembered the shift the moment everything changed. When she finished, she rested her hands in her lap and stared at the keyboard. A strange question formed in her mind. What if this is only the beginning? The thought both excited and frightened her. She had never dreamed of being known. She had never imagined performing anywhere important. But now, with the memory of applause still warm in her chest, she wondered if there was more she was meant to discover. The next morning, the world looked the same, but she didn't feel the same. She woke early, long before her family, and stepped outside for a walk. The street was quiet. Only a few shops were open. The air smelled like fresh bread and morning dust. She walked without thinking about where she was going. Her feet moved on their own. Her mind was full of music. Not just the melody she played yesterday, but new ones forming in soft pieces, ideas, waiting to become something real. As she walked, she remembered moments from her life when she felt unseen. Times when her hard work didn't matter to anyone else. Times when she wanted to share something, but stayed silent out of fear. She wondered why she had spent so much of her life hiding. What had she been afraid of? Failure? Judgment? Or the possibility that she might actually succeed? She reached a small park and sat on a bench near a tree. She watched the morning unfold, kids heading to school, people jogging, birds hopping across the grass. Life was moving, slowly but steadily. She took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. A small group of children passed by, one of them holding a violin case. She watched them curiously. The kid with the violin looked nervous, almost the way she did before the performance. She wondered if he was learning for the first time. She wondered if he felt pressured or excited. For a moment, she thought about approaching them, offering a smile or a few encouraging words. But she stayed on the bench. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know how to explain something she was still learning herself. After a while, she stood up and walked back home. The morning had helped her clear her mind, but she was still unsure about what her next step should be. All she knew was that something had shifted inside her. Something small but powerful. She reached home, made herself a cup of tea, and sat at her keyboard again. Her fingers hovered over the keys, not touching them yet. She wasn't playing this time. She was thinking. She wondered what would happen if she tried to play for others again. She wondered if people would still listen. She wondered if she could grow from that single performance into something more. She didn't have answers yet. She didn't need them. For now, the questions were enough to keep her moving. She pressed one key lightly. A soft, simple note filled the room. It was just one note, but it carried a promise, one she couldn't put into words yet. She closed her eyes and listened to the sound fade. Everything inside her whispered the same, its quiet truth. Her story was only beginning. She woke up with a strange kind of energy the next few days, something she wasn't used to feeling. It wasn't excitement exactly, and it wasn't fear either. It was something in between, something that made her feel like the world around her had shifted just a little bit. Maybe no one else noticed it. but she felt it with every step she took. Even the air outside seemed different when she walked to school, lighter somehow, as if a small door inside her had finally opened. But with that feeling came a quiet pressure she could not ignore. The memory of the applause followed her everywhere. When she washed the dishes, when she brushed her hair, when she passed by the small hall on her way to the store, she kept replaying the moment when people stopped talking and actually listened to her. It had felt unreal, almost like a dream. And now, she worried it might never happen again. She spent most of her time thinking about the performance. She wondered if she had only played well because she didn't know anyone was listening at first. She wondered if she could still play with the same honesty now that she knew people were watching. It scared her a little, the thought of trying again and failing. But beneath that fear was a spark of quiet hope that maybe she wasn't wrong about her music. School didn't feel any different on the outside. The building still smelled like chalk and old textbooks. The hallways still echoed with footsteps and half-heard conversations. But she walked through it differently, more aware of the world around her. She didn't feel invisible the way she often did. For the first time, she felt like maybe someone, somewhere, might remember her if they saw her again. During lunch break, she went to the small room where the abandoned keyboard used to be. It wasn't there anymore. It had been taken away long ago. The room was empty now, except for a few stacked chairs and a dusty chalkboard leaning against the wall. But she still came here sometimes, just to sit in the quiet and feel connected to the place where her journey had truly begun. She sat on one of the chairs and stared at the bare spot where the keyboard once stood. It was strange how a small moment in a forgotten corner of a building could shape someone's whole life. She traced the memory with gentle clarity, her small hands pressing random keys. Her surprise when notes formed patterns, the comfort she felt when she created something of her own. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she could almost hear the echo of her younger self playing softly, afraid the sound might draw attention. The memory felt warm, familiar, but distant too, like a chapter that had already closed. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed someone standing at the doorway. It was a classmate, someone she barely knew, someone who rarely spoke. He looked startled, as if he hadn't expected to find anyone here. He said quietly, "You were at the event, right? The one who played?" She nodded slowly. He gave a shy smile. "You played really well. I didn't get to say it that day, but it was beautiful." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments always made her feel unsure, like she didn't know what to do with them. She nodded again, softly. Before he left, he added, "You should keep playing. It matters more than you think." Then he walked away, leaving her alone in the quiet room. She sat there for a long moment after he left. His words settled into her mind like a soft weight. Maybe it mattered. Maybe her music meant something to someone other than herself. That evening, she reached home feeling unusually thoughtful. She placed her bag on the floor and sat at her keyboard without turning it on right away. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys as if asking them a question. She wondered if they held the answer to what she should do next. She turned the keyboard on, and the soft hum filled the room. She began playing the same piece she had played at the event, but this time it felt different. She felt every note, every pause, more deeply than usual. She played not because she wanted to hide, but because she wanted to understand herself better. As she played, her mother passed by her door and paused. Usually, she would tell her to lower the volume or finish up and help in the kitchen. But this time, she didn't. She stood there quietly, listening with a gentle look in her eyes. When the girl finished playing, her mother said softly, "That sounds nice. You're getting really good." It wasn't a grand compliment. It wasn't emotional or poetic, but it was enough to bring a small smile to the girl's face. She wasn't used to her family noticing her music, much less praising it. Later that night, her friend called her. She hesitated before answering, but eventually picked up. "Hey," her friend said, sounding cheerful. "I've been thinking. You know that youth music program at the community center? They're offering a small weekend workshop. You should join. You'd learn a lot." The girl's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've never been part of anything like that." "Exactly." Her friend laughed. That's why you should try. You've already shown what you can do on your own. Imagine what you could do with guidance. The idea scared her. She wasn't sure she was ready. She wasn't sure she belonged there. But the thought kept circling in her mind long after the call ended. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything she had been through, playing in hidden corners, teaching herself silently, rarely sharing her music. She wondered if she could take a step forward now. It felt huge, almost impossible. But something inside her whispered that she was stronger than she believed. The next day, she visited the community center. She hadn't told her family or her friends she was going. She wanted to see it alone first, without expectations. The building was simple paint peeling slightly on the walls. Posters about classes taped near the entrance. She stood outside for a few minutes before gathering the courage to walk in. The hallway was lined with photographs of kids participating in different activities, sports, arts, music. She looked at each picture carefully, wondering what it must feel like to be part of something like that. She found the room where the music program was held. She stood at the doorway, watching quietly. A few kids were practicing with a teacher guiding them. The teacher moved with calm confidence, correcting their posture, helping them read notes, encouraging them with gentle words. She felt something stir inside her, a mix of longing and doubt. She stepped back before anyone noticed her. She wasn't ready to sign up yet. Not today. She needed more time. But she didn't leave immediately. She walked around the center, studying the rooms, reading the posters, trying to understand if she could see herself here. On her way out, she heard someone playing a piano from another room. The sound was soft but steady. She followed it, curious. The door to the room was slightly open. Inside, a boy was practicing a simple piece, his fingers stiff and unsure. She stood silently, watching him. He made a few mistakes and sighed heavily, clearly frustrated. The teacher in the room noticed her and smiled. "Can I help you?" the teacher asked gently. She shook her head quickly, feeling shy. "I was just listening." "I'm sorry." "No need to be sorry," the teacher said kindly. "Do you play?" She froze. Her heart beat faster. She thought about lying, saying no. But something in the teacher's voice made her shake her head differently this time. "Yes," she whispered. The teacher smiled warmly. "Maybe one day you'll play for us too, when you're ready." The girl nodded, unsure if she ever would. But grateful for the softness in the teacher's words, she left the center with her mind full of thoughts. She walked slowly, absorbing everything she had seen. The sound of the piano, the posters on the wall, the teacher's gentle smile, they all lingered with her. That evening, when she sat at her keyboard again, she didn't just play her usual melody. She tried something new. She tried adding notes she had heard at the center. She tried shaping the sound differently. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was just repeating what she knew. She felt like she was growing. She spent hours at the keyboard, discovering small pieces of music she never knew she could create. Her fingers felt more alive than they had in days. She didn't realize how much time had passed until she heard her family calling her for dinner as she sat at the table. She noticed she felt lighter, braver, more grounded. The next morning, she picked up the brochure for the music workshop her friend had mentioned. She had left it on her bedside table without daring to open it before. Now, she unfolded it carefully and read every line. Her hands trembled a little, not from fear this time, from possibility. She didn't know if she would be accepted. She didn't know if she would be good enough. But she knew one thing for certain. She wanted to try. And sometimes, wanting to try was the first step that changed everything. The moment the auditorium doors closed behind her, everything she thought she understood about people, music, and belief began to shift. The weight of what had happened the night before stayed with her the next morning. It's not as a burden, but as a strange kind of warmth she wasn't used to feeling. It followed her as she walked down the quiet street toward the small music room where she practiced. The sky was soft and pale, as if it was waking up with her, and she felt that same quiet stir inside her. She kept replaying the way the crowd had reacted when she played. She wasn't used to being noticed. Most of her life, people simply walked past her without a second glance. But last night, something different had happened. People stared, not in a harsh way, but in a way she couldn't explain. Some faces looked surprised, some curious, and a few seemed almost moved. She didn't know what to do with that feeling. She stepped into the practice room, and the familiar scent of old wood and metal filled the air. She reached for the piano bench and sat down slowly. Her hands rested on her lap as she stared at the instrument. She remembered how nervous she usually felt, but now there was something new in her chest. A quiet confidence, a small, growing courage. She lifted her hands and pressed a soft note. The sound spread gently through the empty room. It was warm, like someone calling out her name in a kind way. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move. The melody wasn't something she had planned. It came from a place inside her that she didn't always understand. A place made of memories, hopes, and moments she kept hidden as she played. She thought about all the times she had felt small or unimportant. She had lived most of her life believing she wasn't meant to stand out. She told herself that her place was somewhere quiet, somewhere unseen. But after last night, she couldn't fully believe that anymore, and that confused her. It frightened her a little, too. The door behind her opened gently. She turned and saw an older man who often cleaned the practice rooms. He wasn't someone who spoke much, but he always gave her a small nod when they crossed paths. Today, he held a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. He stood still for a moment, listening. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. She blinked, unsure how to respond. Compliments were rare for her. She wasn't used to them. He gave her a small smile. "You play like someone who talks through music instead of words." She looked down at the keys, feeling a shy warmth spread across her face. She didn't know how to explain what playing meant to her, how music was the only place she felt like herself. So she didn't say anything. She just nodded. The man set his bucket down and sat on a nearby chair. "You know," he said softly, "there are many people in this world who walk around without ever being seen. They blend into the background. They do their work, live their lives, and no one pays attention. But sometimes, someone comes along who's meant to be seen." She felt something shift inside her. His voice wasn't loud or dramatic, but it held a kind truth, and I think, he continued gently, "you might be one of them." She didn't know what to say. She stared at the keys again, her fingers trembling slightly. "Why would you think that?" She whispered. "Because what you played last night wasn't ordinary," he said. "People don't react like that to something simple. They react like that when they feel something." His words wrapped around her like a soft blanket. She didn't know how to accept them. She had spent years learning to expect very little from others. Hearing something kind felt almost unfamiliar. She finally spoke. "Maybe they were just surprised. Maybe they didn't expect anything from someone like me." The man shook his head. "That's the thing about expectations. People think they know what others are capable of just by looking at them. But the truth is, no one really knows anything until they see it for themselves." She stayed quiet. She didn't fully understand why everyone had been so shocked, but she understood what he meant. People didn't expect much from her, and maybe that was why it felt so powerful when she managed to change their minds. She lifted her hands again and played a soft, short melody. The man listened quietly, nodding along with the rhythm. "You have something inside you," he said when she finished. "Something rare. And once people see it, they can't forget it." She swallowed hard. His words settled deep inside her chest. She didn't feel like someone rare. She felt like someone who had been invisible for most of her life. As the man returned to his cleaning, she continued to play. She tried to make sense of the thoughts circling her mind. She wondered what would happen next. Was last night just a one-time moment? Or was it the beginning of something bigger? She didn't dare hope for too much, but she couldn't help wondering. Later that afternoon, she walked into the main hall, where a small group of students had gathered. They whispered among themselves, their voices low and curious. When she stepped inside, the whispers grew softer. A few people turned to look at her. She felt their eyes. Not in the old way, where the glances were dismissive or mocking. These looks were different, full of curiosity, maybe even admiration. One girl approached her hesitantly. Were you the one who played last night?" She nodded slowly. "That was amazing," the girl said. "I've never heard someone play like that." Others joined in, offering small comments and questions. It felt strange to be surrounded by people who wanted to talk to her. She didn't know how to react. She tried to answer politely, but kept her responses short. A boy stepped forward. "We're having a small gathering after class. Just music and some snacks. You should come." She froze. Invitations were something she wasn't used to receiving. In the past, she was usually the person people forgot to include. "I don't know," she murmured. "It's nothing formal," the boy said with a friendly shrug. "Just a few of us." "And maybe you could play something again?" The thought made her chest tighten. She didn't dislike playing. She loved it more than anything. But playing in front of people still scared her. Last night had felt magical, but she wasn't sure she could repeat that moment. She gave a small nod. "Maybe." The group smiled and drifted away, leaving her standing alone for a moment. She tried to breathe, letting the unusual attention settle. When she returned home that evening, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. She stepped into her small room, placed her bag on the floor, and sat on the edge of her bed. The room was quiet. She finally allowed herself to feel everything. She remembered the way the audience had looked at her. She replayed the whisper she had heard earlier in the day. She thought about the older man's words, and she wondered why it all felt so heavy and so hopeful at the same time. She closed her eyes and let the silence settle around her. Then she stood and walked to the small keyboard she kept near her window. It wasn't much, just a simple instrument with worn keys, but it was enough. She began to play again, letting the notes fall gently in the dim light. She didn't play for anyone else this time. She played for herself. For the part of her that had always wanted to be heard, but never believed she could be. As the evening deepened, her music filled the small room. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt something shift inside her. Something small but real. She was beginning to believe. Not fully. Not loudly, but enough to take the next step. And sometimes, that's all a person needs. Because once someone proves the world wrong, even for a moment, the world never looks at them the same again. The morning of the gathering arrived quietly. Without any grand sign or sudden change, she woke up early, long before the sun fully rose, and sat on the edge of her bed with her hands loosely clasped. Her room was still dim, the faint light from the window barely touching the walls. She took a slow breath and tried to steady the strange mix of excitement and nervousness inside her. She wasn't used to being invited anywhere. She wasn't used to people wanting to hear her play. And yet here she was, getting ready for something she never expected to be part of. She didn't know what the others would want or what they would say. She didn't know if she could play as well as she had before. She hoped she wouldn't disappoint anyone. She stood up and brushed her hair gently. She wore simple clothes, nothing fancy, just something clean and comfortable. She didn't like drawing attention to herself with anything other than her music. That was the only place she felt safe to be seen. When she arrived at the small campus hall where the gathering was supposed to happen, she paused outside for a moment. The quiet hum of voices came from inside, light and warm. She swallowed hard and took a step forward. The room was filled with soft yellow light, and a few groups of students sitting around tables. Someone had placed snacks and drinks on a long table near the back. A portable speaker played soft music in the background. It wasn't crowded, but it felt alive. When she stepped in, a few people turned their heads, then more. She froze for a second, unsure if she had made a mistake by coming. But then the same boy who invited her earlier waved gently and walked over to her. "You made it," he said with a smile. "I'm glad you came." She gave a small nod, still unsure what to do with her hands. "You don't have to play right away," he added quickly. "Just relax. Enjoy the snacks. Talk to people if you feel like it." She appreciated his kindness. He wasn't pushing her. He wasn't putting pressure on her. He was simply letting her be. She walked further into the room and found an empty chair near the side. From there, she could see everyone without being in the center. She watched people laugh, talk, and move around. She stayed quiet, but felt more comfortable than she expected. After a while, someone approached her with a plate of small pastries. "Want one?" the girl asked kindly. She took one and thanked her softly. The girl sat down beside her. "You know, everyone's been talking about your performance from the other night." Her stomach tightened. "Really?" The girl nodded with a warm smile. In a good way. People were surprised, but not in a bad sense. More like amazed. She looked down at her hands. "I didn't expect anyone to notice." "That's the funny thing," the girl said. "People notice when something real happens." Those words stuck with her. Something real. Maybe that was why people reacted the way they did. Not because she was special, but because the emotion in her music was true. After a few minutes, the boy who organized the gathering tapped a spoon gently against a glass. "Hey everyone," he said, his voice rising over the room. "Thanks for coming. We're just keeping things simple. Today some snacks, some music, and maybe a little sharing, if anyone feels like it." A few people clapped lightly. Then he turned toward her. "And only if she's comfortable. We were hoping to hear our new friend play again." All eyes shifted toward her. Her chest tightened again. She wasn't ready. She didn't feel fully confident. But something in the room, maybe the quiet warmth, maybe the kindness in people's expressions, made her feel a little braver than usual. She nodded. A soft murmur of excitement spread through the room. Someone moved a small keyboard toward the center so everyone could see. She walked to it slowly, each step light but steady. She sat down on the bench and placed her fingers on her knees for a moment. Then she lifted her hands and rested them. On the keys, the room fell silent. She closed her eyes. She took one slow breath. Then she began to play. This time, the notes didn't burst from her with fear or desperation. They flowed gently, as if she were opening a door inside herself and letting the melody walk out on its own. She played softly at first, letting the music test the air. Then her hands moved with more confidence. She didn't think about the people watching. She didn't think about expectations or fear. She played the way she used to when she was alone in her room quietly. Honestly, and with a deep sense of feeling. The melody she chose wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. It was a simple tune that rose and fell like a calm voice telling a gentle story. The notes painted small pictures: early mornings, quiet hopes, soft struggles, a heart that had always tried its best. When she reached the final note, she let it linger in the air. She kept her eyes closed a moment longer, letting her breathing steady again. Then she opened them. The room was completely silent. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the applause began. It started softly, then grew louder, stronger, fuller. People stood. Some clapped with wide smiles. Others looked like they didn't know how to express what they felt. But every face held something warm. She sat there, stunned. She had never thought she could make people feel this way. She had never expected to be met with such honest kindness. When the applause slowly faded, the boy stepped forward. He paused, searching for the right word. That was real. She felt her eyes sting, but she blinked the feeling away quietly. People gathered around her, asking small questions, offering gentle encouragement. No one pressured her. No one made her feel overwhelmed. They simply wanted her to know that her music had touched them. She stood there listening, unsure how to absorb so much kindness at once. But slowly, as the minutes passed, she felt something settle inside her. Belonging, a feeling she had rarely known. Later that evening, when the gathering ended and the last of the students drifted out, she stayed behind for a moment. The boy approached her again. "You know," he said softly, "I think this is just the beginning for you." She looked at him quietly. "I don't know about that." "I do," he said with a steady smile. "People don't react like that for nothing. You have something inside you that people connect to." She didn't argue. For the first time, she didn't try to shrink away from the possibility. When she stepped outside, the evening air was cool against her skin. The sky was dark, but the streetlights cast a warm glow along the path. She walked slowly, feeling lighter than she had in a long time, as she neared her home. She stopped for a moment and looked up at the sky. She let the quiet settle around her. She remembered the older man's words from the day before. How he had said that some people are meant to be? She didn't know if she believed that fully, but she believed something else, that maybe she didn't have to stay hidden, that maybe she could let herself be heard, that maybe she could take up space in the world without feeling like she was in someone else's way. When she reached her room, she sat down at her small keyboard again. She placed her fingers on the keys and smiled softly. She began to play a new melody, one she had never played before, one that felt like a doorway opening. The notes floated gently into the air of her small room. They were hopeful, quiet, but strong, simple, but full of meaning, just like her. And as the melody filled the night, she felt something she never expected to feel, not fear, not doubt, but readiness. Ready for whatever might come next. Because the world had finally heard her, and she was finally beginning to hear herself too.